Okay, Haribol, welcome everyone to the Bhakti Center's daily Bhagavatam. Very honored to have Sri Prahlad Prabhu, who is a luminary in his own right worldwide and a very, very dear friend of Sri Radhika's and myself. He grew up in the movement in Gurukul, and at a very young age started traveling with His Holiness Indradumna Swami. His kirtans for like 15 years or so with Indradumna Swami are still played by devotees almost on a daily basis because they're so joyful. And currently he's a professor at a prestigious university in London, and he teaches organizational behavior, right, Sri Prahlad Prabhu? Yeah. And so we're very happy and honored to have you with us, and not just a professor of organizational behavior, but a very expert Srimad Bhagavatam speaker. So the mic is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you, dear devotees, for this opportunity to be in your company and to discuss Srimad Bhagavatam with you. So today we are discussing some verses from the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. I just thought to give a little context to how I'd like to discuss these verses. Yasodha Dalal Prabhu said that in addition to serving in the society as a preacher and kirtaniya and whatever other services devotees may kindly engage us in, I also work as an academic here in London. And for the past year, I've been involved with a project researching questions around devotees and our society, and the decision to take up bhakti and join an ashram. We're a big organization, so there's the context for the overlay with my academic work, as well as the circumstances that lead up to a decision to move out of the ashram as well. And behind these questions, our essential question is, how can bhakti be practiced sustainably? I guess that's the intention of our questions. So in our class today, we'll consider these questions by discussing and learning some lessons from the lives of Parasharam and Vishwamitra Muni. And you might wonder, what have their stories to do with questions around a decision to join or continue serving in the Hare Krishna movement? You'll soon see. So we're discussing Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 16, verses 25 to 28. So text 20, I'll chant the invocation mantra. We can chant together. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 16, verse 25. My dear King, Parikshit, in the next Manvantara, the lotus-eyed personality of Godhead, Lord Parasharam, the son of Jamadagni, will be a great propounder of Vedic knowledge. In other words, he will be one of the 7 rishis. Text 26. Lord Parasharam still lives as an intelligent Brahmana in the mountainous country known as Mahendra, completely satisfied, having given up all the weapons of a Kshatriya. He is always worshipped, adored, and offered prayers for his exalted character and activities by such celestial beings as the Siddhas, Charanas, and Gandharvas. Text 27. In this way, the Supreme Soul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord, and the Supreme Controller descended as an incarnation in the Bhrigu dynasty and released the universe from the burden of undesirable kings by killing them many times. And text 28, this is the verse which we will discuss with Prabhupada's commentary. Gadhir Abhun Mahateja Samidha Eva Pavakam Tapasa Kshitram Utsrijya Yo lebhe brahma Shasam. Translation. Vishwamitra, the son of Maharaj Gadi, was as powerful as the flames of fire. From the position of a Kshatriya, he achieved the position of a powerful Brahmana by undergoing penance and austerity. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Now, having narrated the history of Lord Parasharam, Sukadeva Goswami begins the history of Vishwamitra. From the history of Parasharam, we can understand that although Parasharam belonged to the Brahminical group, he circumstantially had to work as a Kshatriya. Later, after finishing his work as a Kshatriya, he again became a Brahmana and returned to Mahendra Parvata. Similarly, we can see that although Vishwamitra was born in a Kshatriya family, by austerities and penances, he achieved the position of a Brahmana. These histories confirm the statements in Shastra that a Brahmana may become a Kshatriya may become a Brahmana or a Vaishya, and a Vaishya may become a Brahmana by achieving the required qualities. One's status does not depend on birth, as confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 11, Text 35 by Narada. Yasya lakshanam proktam pumso bharana bhibanjakam yad anyatrapi drishyeta tatte naiva vinirdishet. If one shows the symptoms of being a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Sudra, even if he has appeared in a different class, he should be accepted according to those symptoms of classification. To know who is a Brahmana and who is a Kshatriya, one must consider a man's quality and work. If all the unqualified Sudras become so-called Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, social order will be impossible to maintain. Thus, there will be discrepancies. Human society will turn into a society of animals, and the situation all over the world will be hellish. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Gyan Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Rupa Shri Sanatana Bhatta Raguna Shri Jiva Gopal Bhatta Dasa Raguna Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Tadati Swapadantikam. Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabhandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Vaishnavas. Gaura Bhaktivinoda ki Jai. Before I start this class proper, discussing these verses, I want to give a little context for the verses. So they appear in the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And if we understand this, we get the bigger story. A key for understanding the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is to recognize that it has two main stories. These two main stories are, one, the story of the kings of the Surya Vamsa, or the Sun dynasty. That's chapters 1 through to 13. From Vivishwan to Manu to Ikshvaku, and finally to Sri Ramachandra. So it's a story of the family in which Sri Ramachandra appeared. That's half of the book, verses, chapters 1 to 13. And then the second half, 14 to 24, is the story of the Chandra Vamsa, the story of the kings descended from the moon, from Pururava to Gadi to Yayati to Puru, culminating in the appearance of Sri Krishna, which anticipates then the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, which expands out and gives us Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan, in Mathura, and in Dwaraka. So there's so much to be learned from these two dynasties in which the Supreme Lord chooses to make his appearance. And these stories of kings show us that the challenges, well, they show us the challenges of life in the material world. They also, more importantly, show us essentially, whether it's the story of Pururava or Prishadra or Trishanku or Sobhari, the limitations of karma kanda, fruitive activities, Vedic rituals for material enjoyment, and jnana or yoga, dry renunciation, and austerity as means for perfection. And they show, most importantly, the redeeming power of bhakti. So today we are reading some verses in relation to Parasharam and Vishwamitra. Both of these stories appear within the big story of the Chandra Vamsa, or the Moon Dynasty. And from these verses that we read, I would like to discuss some insights from the pastimes of Parasharam, because most of the verses we read were about Parasharam. We had the final verse was about Vishwamitra, and Prabhupada's commentary integrated these two stories, drew parallels between these two stories, and he gave some instructions concerning Varnasrama Dharma. And so we can also discuss Varnasrama Dharma and its relevance to us, for us today, as we seek to cultivate bhakti individually and as a community. And the key question that I gave you at the very beginning was how to cultivate bhakti sustainably. So let's begin with Parasharam. He is a Brahmana, but it may surprise you to know that his grandfather was King Gadi in the Chandravamsa. His grandmother was Princess Satyavati, not the Satyavati who we hear about later on in the Mahabharata, who married the father of Bhishma, Shantanu. This is a different Princess Satyavati, the daughter of King Gadi. She marries a rishi named Richika. So a princess marrying a rishi, marrying a Brahmana. Richika performed, he very powerful Brahmana. He had actually requested Gadi, let me marry your daughter. And the king wasn't very excited to give his daughter to a simple Brahmana who lives an austere life. So he gave him an impossible task. He says, if you bring me this particular, he actually demanded, I think it was something like 1,000 horses, white in color with a black ear. Like, where do you get 1,000 horses with a black left ear? Or something like that. But he's a powerful Brahmana. He went to, I think he went to the sun god and said, I need 1,000 horses, white with a left black ear, and they were arranged. So then he went to King Gadi, he said, here are the horses, may I please have my bride? And so Gadi, he kept his side of the, not with much enthusiasm, but he kept his side of that agreement. So he married his daughter, Princess Satyavati, to Richika. Now Richika, he wanted to perform a sacrifice so that his wife, Satyavati, and his mother-in-law, the queen, that's his wife's mom, yeah, that they will have sons, powerful sons. So he's arranged this yagya, and from the sacrifice, he generates some charam. This is some prasad that's generated from the sacrifice, and he gives it to the queen, one portion. The other portion he gives to the princess, to his wife, that they will both have powerful sons. And he left to the river to take his bath. And when he had gone, the queen, she was thinking, my daughter she's the wife of this Brahmana. He must have given her a more powerful prasad. So let's exchange. She told her daughter, I want to exchange these portions. And the daughter, she's like, okay, yes, she's simple. She doesn't see any issue here. Sure, mom. Here, you have my prasad, I'll have your prasad. Nice exchange, mother-daughter exchange. And Richika returns from his bath and he understands what's happened. And he said, this is a big mistake. This is a big mistake because your prasad, he says to his wife, was prepared with a mantra to have a Brahmana son. And your mother's, the queen's prasad, was prepared with a mantra to have a powerful Kshatriya son. And what's going to happen now is that, well, that our child, means he and Satyavati, their child will be he will be the son of a Brahmana father, but he will have fierce qualities, a fierce nature like a Kshatriya. And the prince who's born to the Kingadi and the queen, he will be a Kshatriya man, but he will be having a gentle nature like a Brahmana. He'll have more of a scholarly nature. And so his wife was very sad, Princess Satyavati, and she asked, can you do something about this? Can we change the effects of this course of action that has already been put in motion? And he said, not really. He said, what I can do, you're asking me, so if I'll do something for you, we will delay it by one generation. You will have a Brahmana son, but your grandson will be quite fierce. And so Jamadagni is their son, and Parasharam is their grandson. Parasharam, he's Brahmana by birth, but he has a very fierce nature. And he could not tolerate the misbehavior of the Kshatriyas. Particularly, it started with Kartavirya Arjuna, but then from him to his sons, and then other Kshatriyas as well. So he ended up killing 21 generations of miscreant Kshatriyas. So we've read something of his glories in these verses 25 to 27, that he will be one of the Saptarishis in the next Manvantara. Another was that he still lives at Mahendra mountain, having given up his fighting, and he's worshipped by different types of beings. We also read that he's an avatar, an incarnation. So Sri Rupa Goswami clarifies in the Lagu Bhagavatamrita that yes, he is an avatar, he is a Shaktya Avesh avatar. He gives another example is Prithu Maharaj. So he's empowered specifically to rule, Prithu Maharaj. And then Narada Muni, he's empowered, he's also a Shaktya Avesh. A Jiva soul who is empowered specifically to teach Bhakti. And the 4 Kumaras, they're also counted as one avatar, the 4 of them, but they're classified as one Shaktya Avesh avatar, also for preaching principles of Bhakti. So what are some take-home messages then for you and I from this story of Parasharam? One is that we can see the nature or the Varna of the parents having some influence on the Varna of the offspring as well. In this story, we have Parasharam having some kind of, Prabhupada mentions it in the purport, a mixed Brahmana Kshatriya nature, because he has these 2 sides to his family. And then, yeah, whatever the story that happened in between, but still the effect was there, that he has this Brahmana Kshatriya nature. Another lesson from Parasharam is that Krishna does not appreciate rulers who abuse their positions, who use their position to abuse rather than to protect the citizens. And so if we are in any position of power, we should be conscious. Parasharam wants us to protect rather than abuse our authority. And this could also mean encouraging people to serve and practice bhakti according to their own natures. We'll talk more about that idea as we go forward. Verse 28, we read about Vishwamitra. So he's our second topic for today. What's the connection between Parasharam and Vishwamitra? Why, after reading some chapters about Parasharam, are we suddenly, without any real kind of segue, apparently, are we suddenly reading a verse about Vishwamitra? there is a king. There are links. Prabhupada draws some parallels in his commentary. He says Parasharam is a Brahmana who acted as a Kshatriya. Similarly, Vishwamitra, as a flip, the reverse, he is a Kshatriya who acted as a Brahmana. And Prabhupada takes this as indicating that Varna is determined by guna and karma, by qualities and by activities. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Chatu Varnam Maya Shistam Guna Karma Vibhagashaha. I have created 4 divisions of society, and they will be understood according to their qualities, their guna, as well as their karma, their activities. There's another link between Parasharam and Vishwamitra. And that is that Vishwamitra is related to Parasharam on family lines. He is, in fact, Parasharam's great uncle. The story that we were discussing earlier about Parasharam's birth is the same story of Vishwamitra as well. When sage Richika performed his sacrifice and created that prasad that got switched between the queen and the princess, Vishwamitra is the prince who was born with the Brahminical nature. So he's Queen Satyavati's brother. Originally, he ruled as a king. He inherited the kingdom from his father, King Gadi, and but eventually he passed on his kingdom without living his full life, so to speak, a natural point of retirement. The Ramayana tells the story of Vishwamitra. He ruled as a king for a period, but he noticed that the Brahmanas, particularly sage Vashishta, had greater opulence and power through their mantras and their austerities than all of the material and military power that he, Vishwamitra, had as a king. And that irked him, actually. How is it that Vishwamitra, Vashishta, living in the forest, living in a simple hermitage, but he's able to host so many soldiers? Because Vishwamitra visited once. He stopped by and Vashishta welcomed him to the ashram and provided lots of hospitality. And he was surprised. How can this poor Brahmana afford such hospitality? And then the other is that when he tried to take something from Vashishta, the source of all that opulence was a Kamadhenu cow. He tried to take it by force, sent his soldiers with all their weapons, and Vashishta was able to repel them. And so he said, how is it that this simple Brahmana, just by his mantras and his tejas, he's able to repel my military might? And so he gave up his kingdom to become a sage, to take to mantra and to take to tapas, to develop Brahminical power. His determination to become a Brahmana had somewhat of a Kshatriya quality to it, driven by rivalry and ambition to be great and powerful. But nonetheless, he was drawn to the Brahminical way of life. He performed austerities that were fierce and determined, true to his Kshatriya nature. He encountered many obstacles. He was tested by Menaka, very famously. In the Vedic literature, there will be references to the tinkling of Menaka's ankle bells and how it can cause a great man to become distracted from severe penance. That person is Vishwamitra. Menaka had been sent by Indra to distract him because Indra was concerned that his penance and austerity was too fierce, too powerful, and he could become a rival for the kingdom of the throne of heaven. So Shakuntala was born from that interaction with Menaka. She later married Dushyanta, a great Kuru king. At another point, he used his Brahminical power, exhausted, we can say, his Brahminical power to send a king, Trishanku, into heaven in his human body. That's the story that's told in Srimad Bhagavatam. King Trishanku, he had this, we could say, a crazy, whimsical desire to enter Svarga in his human body. And so he approached his guru Vashishta and said, can you arrange this? Can you perform a sacrifice to send me to heaven? And Vashishta, he said, look, even if I could, I wouldn't. It's not right. You don't ascend to heaven with a human body. You need the body of a devata. You need an appropriate body to enter that realm. And so this king, he therefore instead approached Vishwamitra, knowing that there was some rivalry. He said to Vishwamitra, I asked Vashishta, he couldn't do it. Could you do it? Vashishta said, yep, I could. And he performed the sacrifice, and Trishanku started to rise into the heavens. But then Indra, he saw, who's this human, mortal coming into heaven? That's not right. And so he sent Trishanku back down to earth. And so you have these two forces, one of Vishwamitra sending the king up, and then the other of Indra sending the king down. Trishanku gets stuck in between. And even today, that's a kind of a Vedic reference for somebody who's stuck in the position of Trishanku, neither here nor there, neither on earth nor in heaven. What Vishwamitra did was he created a parallel heaven. Okay, Indra, you don't want to have Trishanku in your place? See the power of my mantra, the power of my tejas. Here's another heaven to rival yours. And so I'm from Australia. In Australia, you can see very clearly the Southern Cross. It's on the flag, the Australian flag, and Trishanku is the Southern Cross, the crux. That's the parallel heaven created by Vishwamitra, by the power of his austerities. So eventually, Vishwamitra, he, after these distractions, he becomes purified. His lust and his rivalry are curtailed by ongoing practice, meditation, austerity, mantra, japa, sadhana, and Brahma eventually declares him as Brahma Rishi. And he ends up becoming a teacher for Sri Ramachandra and Lakshman. When Ram and Lakshman are taken by him to protect the fire sacrifice from Maricha, Vishwamitra is the guru, essentially. He's a guru for Ram and Lakshman, and amiable relations are established with Vashishta, who accepts Vishwamitra as a fellow rishi, as a fellow Brahma rishi. So some take-home ideas for you and I. Vishwamitra's story tells us that the opulence of self-discipline is greater than the opulence of materiality. It also suggests that we shouldn't expect perfection to be immediate. It's a gradual process. We'll likely encounter obstacles along the way. We'll have missteps. There'll be times when our pride or jealousy or whatever come forth. It's not a reason to give up. It's a progressive journey. And then, as Prabhupada points out in his purport, Vishwamitra's story is also a nice example from Shastra of someone whose personality or Varna is different from the Varna of the parents. It shows us how Varna is determined not just by birth. That may be a strong influencing factor, but it's not the end of the story. More importantly, as a consideration Prabhupada establishes in his purport, is guna, the qualities or disposition, the personality, as well as karma. That is the activities we perform, particularly to earn a livelihood. That can be a good indicator of Varna. Bhagavatam has other examples of people who were born in one family, the family of Kshatriyas, and may take to a Brahminical nature or other situations. So in the 5th canto, we read of Rishabdev. He had 109 sons. And 100 of those sons, they are Kshatriyas. And 9 of them become great sages, the Nava-yogendras, the kings of yoga. Yoga Indra, the Indras of yoga. and they speak wonderfully on Bhakti to King Nimi in the 11th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. Ramaharshana Sutta is another example. So he's the speaker of the Puranas. He's born of a Kshatriya father and a Brahmana mother. He's honored as a Puranika. And then his son, Sutta Goswami, is the great speaker of Bhagavatam that we hear from when we read the Srimad Bhagavatam today. Let's go to our third point then. We've been hearing of Varna and birth and the occupation or the Varna of the parents and then the Varna of the offspring, and whether it might match or might diverge from that of the parents. So what is the relevance of Varnasrama Dharma for us, for you and I today? I recognize that I'm addressing devotees from the Bhakti Center or connected with the Bhakti Center in New York, and I'm in London. What is the relevance of Varna Dharma for us today? In the West, people can be quite sensitive actually to the idea of labeling others. As a Brahmana or a Sudra or a Vaishya, that can be very sensitive. And in India, we have also seen that Varnasrama, or this Varna Dharma, has been used as a tool of domination and exploitation as well. Prabhupada references it in his purport. So this history can turn people in the West away from Vedic teachings as well. I've spoken to people like that. They object to all of Krishna consciousness because of this concern about the exploitation of the Varna system in India. So the first point to make then is that Bhakti transcends Varna Dharma. To a great extent, we could say Varnasrama is irrelevant to the practice of Bhakti. But it's not entirely irrelevant, so we'll come back to this. But first to say that Bhakti transcends. Krishna in the 11th canto of Bhagavatam, chapter 12, tells Uddhava how his devotees in every age are they come from all different types of situations. He gives examples. He says, I have devotees who are demons, who are born of demon families. Vritrasura, Prahlad Maharaj, Bali Maharaj, Banasura, Mayadanava. These are all personalities that Krishna himself claims. You might say, well, when was Mayadanava a devotee? Or Banasura, didn't he fight against Krishna? Krishna's counting them. No, they're my devotees. He's so kind. Vibhishana, Krishna gives us an example of a Rakshasa, who is his great devotee. Krishna gives examples of animals who are his devotees: Sugriva, Hanuman, Jambavan, Gajendra, the elephant. Krishna says, I have bird devotees like Jatayu and Garuda. I have Vaishya devotees, Vanikpata, Tuladhara. Story is described in the Mahabharata. The Brajbasis, they are Vaishyas. He says, I have Sudra devotees like Uddhava, born of a maidservant. I have women devotees like the Gopis and the Brahmapatnis. I have children devotees like Dhruva Maharaj and Prahlad Maharaj and Narad Muni. He was very small when he first took to Bhakti as well. Krishna says, I even have plant devotees. Tulsi Devi and the plants and creepers in Vrindavan, they offer such nice services to Krishna. So despite whatever our material body, whatever our material condition, these examples indicate that Bhakti transcends, the relationship with Krishna transcends these situations of the body or the conditioning, and in fact that the body can even be a vehicle for service, for serving Krishna in different ways, in powerful ways, leveraging what we're given with this body to make a special offering to Krishna. So if Varna isn't important, then why discuss it? And this is because people in different Varnas will have different ways of experiencing, cultivating, and expressing Bhakti. And there's opportunity in that. The body or the Varna, the Guna and the Karma, they can be ways of expressing Bhakti and also for cultivating Bhakti in a sustainable manner. For a devotee, Varnasrama Dharma can be helpful for understanding our conditioned nature and then working to cultivate a sustainable practice. So Yasoda introduced me as someone who teaches and researches organizational behavior. There's great interest today in organizations and understanding personality, with the recognition that, one, the most engaged employees are those who are allocated roles and tasks, positions according to their natures and their strengths that they can then draw upon to actually thrive in the work that they're given. Another reason why personality is really helpful is that in teamwork, the most effective teams are where there is a diversity of personalities and skill sets, each contributing their own strengths to make the team whole. That's the idea of Varnashram, the social body, the head, the arms, the stomach, the legs, all working together to create a whole society. So Vedic teaching on Varna is a way of understanding personality as well. You and I can apply this as a take-home message, that self-awareness and self-knowledge that can come from understanding and situating ourselves according to Varna can be helpful for understanding how to cultivate bhakti, devotional service, in a sustainable, progressive way. There's not one way to cultivate bhakti. There are many pathways. For Arjuna, he's told by Krishna, Ma manu smara yudhyacha. Fight, thinking of me, remembering me. Duryodhana is also fighting. There are so many others who are fighting, but they're not thinking of Krishna. So their fighting is not bhakti. But because Arjuna is fighting while thinking of Krishna, it's bhakti. And so the 7th canto, the 11th canto of Bhagavatam, they give us lots of information to understand Varna Dharma, understanding different personalities and how people in different Varnas can serve, can be properly situated to serve. And we can take this as a guideline for engaging our conditioned nature in service, in bhakti. So I will conclude then by summarizing. You and I have been discussing some points today on the question that I asked at the very beginning, how we situate ourselves to cultivate bhakti in a sustainable manner. And we've been responding to that question with a discussion around Varna Dharma and some points that we've learned by looking at the stories of Parasharam and Vishwamitra. In Parasharam's story, we've learned that we can see the nature of the Varna, of the parents influencing the Varna of the offspring. Parasharam appearing with this mixed Kshatriya Brahmana nature. We also discussed how from Parasharam we've learned that if you're in a position of authority, you must treat people well, because he doesn't appreciate it when we use a position of power to abuse others. From Vishwamitra's story, we learned that perfection is not achieved immediately, not necessarily at least. It will more than likely involve obstacles on a slow and progressive journey. From his story, we also learn that Varna is not determined just by birth, but also by our guna and karma. Vishwamitra is born as a Kshatriya, he lives as a Kshatriya initially, but really his place, where he thrives, is where he can serve. He ends up serving Ram as his own teacher, is as a Brahmana. We also discussed some other key points related to Varna, ashram, dharma, as it relates to you and I. And we discussed how self-awareness in relation to Varna Dharma can be helpful for understanding how to situate ourselves for a progressive and sustainable bhakti cultivation and practice. And I would conclude by saying that if we encourage devotees to cultivate bhakti while working according to their natures, our devotees will be stronger as individuals. And similarly, if we encourage devotees to cultivate bhakti by contributing to the community according to their natures, we'll also have stronger communities as well. So thank you again for this opportunity to share with you. If you have any comments or questions or reflections.
Thank you, Sri Prahlad Prabhu. That was so wonderful. It was very nourishing. It was hope-giving. And, I loved how you summarized the ninth canto and the backstories and how to understand it, because sometimes, I'll be honest, I read all these names and it gets overwhelming. And I was born in Indian culture with some access and familiarity with these names, and I still get bewildered when I read these. So thank you for giving us that bird's eye view and then diving deep to extract some lessons. I had a couple questions, but one you answered by saying that, don't expect results immediately, and obstacles, lust, anger, greed will attack us, from the Vishwamitra story. But I did have one question, from the story of Satyavati's mother, kind of looking over, we all have this tendency, or most of us have this tendency, to look at the other person's plate and say, wow, that person seems to have 2 ladus. I only have 1 ladu. Or they have 3 slices of pizza and I only have 2. Or, whatever, theirs is better. How do we get over that tendency in our day-to-day devotional lives? Most of us might not be very advanced.
Yeah, good question. I don't know that I can give you the whole truth as a response in brief, other than, the bigger response is to say the practice of bhakti will gradually purify those tendencies. But in terms of an immediate, what we can do as a focused, so the practice of bhakti as a broad practice that addresses the material condition in a general way, but as a specific response, particularly if we recognize this tendency might be a particular obstacle for us, because we all have our own idiosyncrasies, right? And so someone, it might be, we recognize, wow, I actually have a tendency to get angry in these types of situations. That might be something to work on. And so if we notice that if somebody has 2 ladus and we start getting a bit jealous about that, then what I would recommend as a particular measure there would be to serve devotees, to find opportunities to render service to those devotees. And if it's individuals, if it's a general tendency, then serve devotees generally, right? So make a concerted effort just to serve Vaishnavas. If it's a particular person that we're having that inclination towards, I would also, I would suggest maybe to get to know them better as well. And we can appreciate the services they do and their qualities, and appreciate why and how Krishna is reciprocating with them by giving them the ladus, or maybe facility, right? Ladu as an indicator of some kind of facility. So that could be helpful as well. Doing either general service for Vaishnavas or specific service for specific Vaishnavas. My experience is that when we have the closer association with devotees, we start to see their glorious qualities in their service, and it awakens our appreciation for them as well.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, serving Vaishnavas is always the safest position to be in anyway. So thank you for reinforcing that. Venkata Bhatta Prabhu had a question. Venkata, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Hare Krishna, Sri Prahlad Prabhu, thank you so much for a wonderful class.
Thanks for the encouragement.
I have to admit, I struggle a little bit with kind of an apparent paradox, maybe, that I'm hoping you can speak to. On the one hand, I think, stories like this one, we often use them or uphold them as a way of showing, well, it really isn't birth. It's more, it's your, guna and karma. But on the other hand, the fact that these stories kind of almost invariably seem to include these really kind of like fantastical backstories of sort of suggesting that the personality being discussed really should have been born in the family that matches their disposition, and it's only some very exceptional sequence of events like the switching of the prashad or whatever that that causes the discrepancy.
Things around, yeah.
Another more sort of recent version of this that I've personally kind of struggled with is there are some tellings or understandings of Haridas Thakur that suggest that he was actually born into like a Brahmin family and was somehow or other separated from his birth family and then adopted by a Muslim family. So even there, we're so used to kind of holding up Haridas Thakur as someone who was born into a non-Vedic, non-Brahmin family, but was made the Namacharya. But even there seems to be a backstory that, that kind of takes us back to birth. And so I have to admit, I kind of find those backstories very disappointing because they seem to undercut this more like egalitarian message. And I'm just wondering if, what your thoughts are on this, or how we can sort of not be disappointed by what seems to be this emphasis on birth.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. Very thoughtful question, Venkatabhata Prabhu. With regard to the Haridas Thakur story, I'll just share a very brief anecdote. I was in Manipur with Indrajuna Maharaj, and we were at the home, invited to a home of some performance. So there were dancers that had been on the Polish festival tour. And they'd seen how the devotees loved Indrajuna Maharaj and served him. And they, when he arrived, they offered Guru Puja to him. So she wanted her family to offer Guru Puja to Indrajuna Maharaj. So we went around to their house. They had a Vyasasana there. They bathed his feet. They offered some puja. And she was from a Brahmana family. And they had invited all their Brahmana friends. Another thing to say, she was not an ISKCON devotee. These were performers that had been arranged by the local Manipur devotees to come to Poland, but they had been arranged because they were performers first. But yeah, Manipur, it's a state of Gaudiya Vaishnavas or Gaudiya Vaishnava heritage. So after the Guru Puja, Indrajuna Maharaj spoke, and then he asked for questions, and one of the men, her family members, he said, "How is it that you're accepting worship from Brahmanas?" He gave a very nice response. He said, "Oh, I'm not qualified, but my Guru Maharaj is very powerful. And he has initiated me into the most powerful mantra, Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And so by the mercy of my Guru and by the mercy of this mantra, even a person like me, born in the West, has been brought to a position where I'm accepting honor on behalf of Krishna in this way." Really nice response. And I kind of chimed in. I said, Haridas Thakur, he was born in a Muslim family and he's honored as Namacharya. And then I probably should have left things as they were, because that man, he responded with the story that you just told. He said, "Oh, Haridas Thakur, he was actually an orphaned Brahmana who'd been adopted by Muslims." The first thing to say, that's not in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And as a general rule for myself, I tend to hold my evidences and the authority that I'll accept as Shastric authority to Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, or anything written by our acharyas. Otherwise, it just gets too broad and too messy. As you would well know, Venkatabhata, there are so many stories from so many different Puranas and Bhagavatas and so forth. But to the heart of your question, I think we need to acknowledge. So yeah, we are enthusiastic to say that the Varna of the parents isn't the defining principle. But I think we also need to recognize that it is a very strong, a very strong influence. And so as a general principle, the children will adopt the profession, the attitudes, the values of their parents. It's not a rule, and Prabhupada would say, just because the dad's a high court judge doesn't mean you're a high court judge. We can accept that. It's not a rule. But it's more likely that the children of a high court judge would be interested in law and will go to university and have those opportunities and at least they'll get a good education, and they will have those connections and end up in a professional role. So it's not the determining factor, but it is a very strong influencing factor. And so when we make the argument that it's not all about birth, I think we should also recognize birth is a strong signifier, but it's not the defining principle. The defining principle is the guna and the karma. And I think when we accept that, it becomes a bit, then these stories kind of make a bit more sense, because there is a strong emphasis on birth in the Bhagavatam and in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And you are right, they appear to go against this egalitarian principle, and it can be confronting for us. I'm sure you've reasoned to that conclusion as well, Venkatabhatta, and maybe my response affirms that conclusion for you.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. That's a really, a nice response. I mean, one thing, I don't want to belabor the point, but another thing that occurs to me hearing your response is, perhaps the Bhagavatam, knowing its audience, also needs to make sure we don't go too far to the other extreme to completely discount birth, and so kind of reminds us that no, okay, birth still has a role to play. Whereas for us, maybe because we're so, especially these days, so primed for like social justice and egalitarianism, that even those reminders kind of maybe are a little jarring for us.
Yeah.
But you make a very good point that it's necessary to remember that they do have a very, very strong influence.
Yeah. Otherwise, like the story of Balaram and Ramaharshana, that can be a bit unnerving as well, where Ramaharshana's birth is forgotten or overlooked, but then when he makes a mistake, it becomes a big issue again. And just one more last point, because you did, bring up Haridas Thakur. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita, we have quite a few other examples. And there's one chapter in particular, I can't remember which, in the Madhya Lila, where the author, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, actually makes the point in a quite emphatic way that Lord Chaitanya is overlooking the birth and the Varnas of his devotees. And he gives the examples of Ramananda Rai, Lord Chaitanya's most intimate associate of a Sudra Varna. And then he mentions Haridas Thakur, Rupa, and Sanatan as Muslims. Again, you could give backstories, but in a strict Vedic culture of that time, that was quite radical, even if they were adopted or even if they chose just for a period to serve under Muslims. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami gives them as examples. He has some others there as well, of how Lord Chaitanya is not really concerned with someone's background and is ready to give his mercy to all. Also, his servant Govindadas is Sudravarna. And the Chaitanya Charitamrita tells that story as well, that he's a godbrother to Lord Chaitanya, and he gets sent by their guru on his deathbed. Ishvara Puri tells Govinda, you go and serve Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he arrives and he says, I'm here to serve you as your personal servant. And Lord Chaitanya says, how can I take his service? He's my godbrother. And the other question is that he's from a Sudra Varna. And so he asks Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and says, well, yeah, this is difficult. Sarvabhauma is like holding to the rule. But then he says, the order of the guru is more powerful. So you follow, if the guru has given that as the order, then you can take him as your personal servant, even though he's your godbrother, and as your personal servant, even though of a Sudra Varna as well. So yeah, there are, aside from Haridas Thakur, if we want to discount him because of this backstory that I don't know where exactly it's from, there are other examples as well.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments for Sri Prahlad Prabhu?
Just hi, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for a beautiful class in the morning. I wanted to say thank you for also reminding me of our nature, like how important it is. And even in a family I'm born with numerous brothers and sisters, I used to compare or get jealous with my sister, like, oh, why is she getting my mother's attention? Why? And then I realized, like, my mom always said, if you're gonna be a janitor, do the best that you can. Like, and if you're gonna be a singer, be the best singer that you can. And then in the Bhagavatam with Vishnu and the moon god and the moon, and even this story that you just shared, it made me it's always like confirmation of how nature works. Like the sun is servant at its own for fire activation, or and then the moon is also like healing and nourishing at night. And we all have our own personal, like our own natures. So the moment that we look within, whatever gifts that God has gifted us, that's when the jealousy vanishes. I feel like I could so like I can have my, I'm more a kapha, my in my, I think it's called Constitution, and my son is more pitta. And I love things like, now I'm starting to realize the power of ghee for me, and my son, he needs cooling, and I see that now that his diet is more fit, like I have to customize it for him. He seems more at peace and more content and more fulfilled. So the same goes with our traits or whatever. If the moment we look within, we'll be able to blossom like nature has proven. And
very good. Yeah, really wonderful insights. And what I'm hearing as you're speaking also is that when we appreciate the gifts we're given, when we're grateful for those, so then you mentioned the jealousy will subside, and then we can appreciate the gift we've been given, and we can make that offering back to Krishna as well as our gift or a service offering to Krishna and to others as well. Very nice. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hare
Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare.
So Sri Prahlad Prabhu, I did mention to you that we typically end at 1:15. So I don't know if you have to go back and teach a class or whatever it is that you're to do. It's the middle of your day. So
yeah, I have it's in the middle of the workday. You're right. So, and I guess the rest of you here also have a day ahead of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining, and hopefully you can come on more often. This was very nourishing, and we hope to see you soon. Tomorrow is Shamananda Prabhu from Chowpatty, so whoever can join, please join in for Srimad Bhagavatam discussion.
Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, Samaveta Bhaktarinda ki Jai,
Sri Prahlad Prabhu ki Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.